Meeting of the Westford School Committee on October 23rd. And if you're able, please join us for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. So we're going to take things a little out of order and just jump past the consent agenda for a minute for our recognition.
Excellent. So we have a wonderful opportunity this evening. We mentioned it before briefly, but Jack, did you, well, we'll just do the award first, and then we'll ask you some questions. So Jack Whitman is one of 23 people in the world who scored perfectly on your AP chemistry exam last spring. Is that correct? Why don't you come sit up here? And Mr. Niddle, would you join him as well, too? We'll put you on the hot seat since you helped guide this process. So we found out that, and there were 141,000 people who took the same test. Yeah. And you are one of 23 in the world. Did they tell you that when you opened the 5? When you opened it up and you're like, oh, I got a 5, no. Which is awesome. That is awesome in itself. You had no idea that you had a perfect score?
No clue, yeah. In July, it was just, I was happy I got a 5, and that was right? About it.
Yeah. Wow. And so then, are you surprised?
Oh, I never heard of this before.
Right?
I might be a first for our high school, I don't know.
Nice.
Yeah.
I've never heard of it either. I never knew that it was even like that they had that type of,
right?
Because it's like the 1 through 5 is already somewhat strange, you know, that it's that's the way that they're scoring it. So then the fact that they could then figure out that you received every possible point, you along with only 23 people out of the entire world.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's interesting how they do it definitely with, it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 100. Like that's a separate thing that they give.
You only need to get like 80% correct to get a 5.
Less than that.
Yeah, right. I think that's true. Yeah. I'm assuming this wasn't was it your only AP test that you took last year as a junior?
No, I took computer science and U.S. history as well last year.
Yeah. But that doesn't matter because you got a perfect score on the chemistry exam, which is fantastic. What's your course load like this year?
5 APs, so quite a bit more.
Oh, wow.
But there's fewer other classes in there. So I have a study hall block or DLT, and I have a lighter schedule outside of the AP classes.
Okay.
Wow.
Managing it and balancing and just getting through this year is my focus.
Have you celebrated at all this very strange and amazing achievement?
Right now, I think I'm just focused on the next thing, where it's just focus on college applications, then focus on the next step, which will be AP exams this year.
Right.
And then maybe I can catch my breath in May, June, this summer.
Oh my gosh.
And then really think about it. But I've celebrated it in that I've talked with my parents. We've realized that it's a great accomplishment, of course, but it just senior year, it just keeps rolling. I can't sit myself on one thing for too long.
Yeah. Wow.
I'm not a superstitious person by any means, but do you remember what you did that day? What you wore? What you ate? What pencil you used?
Can you replicate
any of those?
Well, I think I used whatever pencil I could find in the drawer. I'll tell you that.
Right? That's great. Did anybody have any questions for Jack or for Mr. Niddle?
Well, I've actually met you before at the Holiday Bazaar, so I was wondering whether that hobby of yours, entrepreneurship, still fits into your senior course load or not.
Well, I actually sold my prints at a fair in Acton yesterday.
Oh, great!
And then the week before that, so those were a couple fairs that I'm still doing.
Awesome.
And then I'll be at the bazaar again this year.
Okay. And do you want to tell everybody else what products you make?
Yes, I run a business called Jack's 3D Prints, and I sell 3D printed Christmas trees, toys, and ornaments for holiday gifts and other decor. And I started in 2019 selling prints, skipped in 2020, of course, and then from there I've branched out to other local fairs. So now I'm selling in Nashua, Acton, Concord as well throughout the fall. And it's been a great hobby, or a great hobby that's turned into a great business.
Yeah.
This is an endorsement, but do you have a website?
I do. Jax3dprints.com.
Hey. Both my kids have the dinosaur, like fidget toy
We
thing.
call him the Flexi Rex.
Yeah,
a little
the
bit,
Flexi
little
Rex.
flexible dinosaur.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Very cool.
That is fascinating.
Yeah.
Nice.
Any other questions?
Any early thoughts about what's next after senior year, after the
I'm,
around?
to my mom's chagrin, she's a chemical engineer. I'm planning on majoring in computer engineering. But
You'll always have this. You will always
will.
have this.
Hey, I'm not fully decided. Maybe I could make her a little bit more happy at some point in the future. But right now, it's like I said, it's just the college applications process. So I'm applying to 18 schools, mostly in the Northeast, but a few in the Midwest as well. So focusing on getting that done.
Awesome.
Well, I'm sure there are probably other ways that you would like to celebrate, but we do have a nice piece of paper for you. We wanted to give you a certificate, just congratulating you. It's not it's a nice piece of paper. What you've already done is truly the achievement. To be able to have that in your back pocket and to know that you achieved that is exceptional. There you go. Congratulations, and thank you for all your work and helping us support that.
We're rooting for you.
Yeah.
We're rooting for you.
Thanks for coming out.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. No, thank you. Don't feel like you have to stay either.
One thing I'd like to say, since you're here,
Oh, yeah.
Mr. Noel, you were a really big part in just enabling me to be able to get that high score, because out of all the classes I've taken at WA, I don't know if there's been one with so much hands-on work, so much enrichment after the class, and so many resources available to me that you went through and you produced with all the videos you posted, all the help guides, the way you do your notes in front of us every class. So thank you for that. That you made it possible.
Pleasure to teach you, Jack.
Thank you.
Well done.
All right. Yes, thank you. I skipped all my usual.
That's okay.
This meeting is being recorded, and that disclaimer is at the top of our agenda. So I'm going to move us on to consent agenda. We have a version of meeting packets, a session of meeting minutes in the packet, 2 warrants, budget updates, status of general funds, an acknowledgement of review and continued non-disclosure of school committee executive session minutes dated August 28th, 2023 under the open meeting law, and an employment agreement between Westford School Committee and Westford Education Association Unit E. Any questions, discussion, comments? Okay, looking for a motion, please.
So moved. Second.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Great, unanimous, thank you. Okay. So we move on to public comment. A reminder that public comment is at the top of the meeting for any item or topic on or off the agenda, and it's always there for individuals to share their thoughts. Speakers will be limited to 2 minutes per person. Please use public comment even if you refer to something later on the agenda. Virtual public comment is available through Zoom. If you raise your hand, you'll be promoted to panelist and unmuted, or in person. As you come up, please introduce yourself at the microphone or on Zoom and give your address. And as a reminder, the committee protocol changed 3 years ago where we do not respond or answer questions that come up, and I know that feels unsatisfying, but that is our committee protocol. So with that, we can get started with no hands so
nobody
far?
online.
Okay.
Yep.
Anyone in the room for public comment?
No. Okay.
Okay.
7:09. Oh.
Give it,
Yeah.
Bill. Yeah, okay, great. Hi.
Good evening.
Hi, guys.
My name
Hi,
is
guys.
Jonathan Ash. I reside at 13 Depot Street. I'm here today again to comment about a couple things, but primarily the Washington DC trip. I was quite upset about it 2 weeks ago, and I'm still upset about it. Still very frustrated. I've spoken to a lot of youth. I just came from WA, and both my kids are there right now as they're playing sports. and they weren't able to make it. But I wanted to say a couple things. One, I'm a big fan of the trip to Washington, D.C., and I feel strongly that the administration was not transparent with their process or their decision or even their reasoning. I've heard comments from various folks that were in the PTO meetings recently, and it seems like they're getting a little bit of a different story than what was told to us 2 weeks ago. I also feel strong that there's probably some other reasons that they're just not talking about, and I don't appreciate that lack of transparency. I think their rationale was thin, and it did not persuade me that they have the best interests of our children in their minds. I think that the cost of what they are calling inclusion is in fact 350 kids that are now not going to go to Washington, D.C. And the salve that they suggested, a trip to Canopy, a duck boat tour, is embarrassing. And I'm really upset by it. I think, we've got kids now that are going to miss the opportunity to go to the Holocaust Museum, the Air and Space Museum, the Lincoln Memorial, the Vietnam Memorial, Arlington National Cemetery, the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, places that I'm sure we've all been to, and places that are really memorable. Some of those, and I understand some of the teachers are saying, oh, well, the kids, they're not passionate about it. The kids have their heads in their phones. They're looking at their phones. Well, that's the reality of a lot of kids these days, and I understand how that's upsetting. I've got kids that look at their phones. It drives me nuts, right? And I could see a teacher, chaperone being upset by that. But that is the kids' reality to some extent. And if you want to encourage the kids to put their phones away and get parents to tell the kids to put their phones away on the trip, go for it. I'm all for it. But now, instead, we've just canceled the trip. And, again, we're sort of saying that we're doing this so that because we want to include other kids. Now, the kids that wouldn't have had an opportunity to go on that trip, they're now excluded from doing it. Those kids that probably would not have gone to D.C. with their families, now they won't get that opportunity, as youngsters in these formative years. I just can't tell you how upset I am by this. If the issue is with teachers, which, again, the administration did not tell us it was a teacher issue. But if it was, I wish they had said something to us as parents. I encourage you, members of the school committee, to send a message to Dr. Chu and to the administration that this is what we expect of them. We want them to send our kids to D.C. We want them to send them to even maybe Disney and other places that the high school kids have now had taken from them. When they took away the 5th grade camp, which I will now go back to, and I'm curious, is that the reason that you guys changed your committee protocol? I was here. It wasn't in this room, but I was at those meetings where we discussed the 5th grade camp when this administration, I take it back, not this administration, I think that was prior administration, took away the 5th grade camp. I could be wrong though, whose administration it was. And at that meeting, the public was very upset. I know some of you were there. We were very upset by it, but we were part of the conversation. And I am so upset. And my kids were here not understanding. Why is the public not part of this discussion? We weren't asked to be part of the discussion, with the school and the administration. I think that's terrible. But even today, I'm not able to ask a question of the principals or specifically when this comes up later in the agenda. And I don't agree with this policy. I think it's a terrible policy. So we're asked to sit in the back and listen as we're hearing things that, we're getting answers that just don't make sense. Again, a very thin argument last week or 2 weeks ago, very thin, not persuasive.
I'm just going to ask you to make one more point. You're over your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone online?
Oh, we have one. Yeah, there we go.
Can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
We can, thanks.
Can you hear me?
Oh, sorry, yes, we can hear you.
us? Can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you. This is Janine Jones, 16 Jenny Richards Road. I was there a couple weeks ago as well, and I just, I just wanted to go on record and voice my continued disappointment and, with the whole process about the DC trip. I think you've left a lot of students, parents, quite dismayed by the process. It's clear that this trip isn't happening for a variety of reasons. I don't think that we've been told the full extent. I think there's definitely some underlying backstory here, but regardless, I think the big point is that the parents and students weren't asked, weren't involved in the process, which I think is really disappointing for, especially for those parents who are quite involved with the schools and PTO. It's really left a bad taste in our mouths, and there's a number of parents now working, behind the scenes to try to get these kids to DC. Ultimately, it will be up to the parents. And I think the ironic thing about this, you talk about inclusion, and I think you're going to end up having far less people attend this secondary option in May and June than if we had just kept the original plan. It's just disappointing. It's discouraging. I feel like our kids, and as parents and teachers and administration, we can do better in this town. And I think everyone has kind of said it before, and I'm sure we're just hammering it again. But thank you for your time. And I hope that in the future these kinds of things can be avoided. I really do think that there should have been forums to discuss all of this, and it should have been more transparent.
Thank you. That's it. Just take one more beat just to make sure. Yep. Okay. Thank you. And next is informational updates. Superintendent.
Thank you. Last week, I can't remember which day of the week it was, it might have been Monday, the Representative Arciero and Senator Cronin presented the principal at NAB and Jamie Holmes and myself and Jeff Goodwin with an initial funds for a playground project at the NAB school, which I think is exciting, and I appreciate the work that Jamie did in actually trying to secure that, which I think is going to help us kick off
You mean
more opportunities.
Jim, right? Jim Arciero is the one that.
Yeah,
secured
I
it.
said, Jamie Holmes, but Representative Arciero, yeah.
Is
yeah.
the one that put in the, yeah.
He presented us with the money, right, and it came from an earmark that people were advocating for.
Yeah.
Yeah, was kind of what I was getting at. So we're excited about that, and that might be one of the things that Mr. Goodwin mentions tonight. We had I put in the packet the newsletter for Valley, the Valley Collaborative. They shared that with me we had a board meeting last Thursday, and so I just share that with you as an informational update to see what's happening there. We are a member of that collaborative there, so I think it's a good thing for us to share with you. And then the last thing, I had the joy of going to Westford Academy last week and seeing anything but a backpack day, which was quite entertaining. Everything from strollers, I saw a fishing net, I saw a Jeep, the electric Jeep. I can't remember who was driving it. Someone was driving it around, bringing their stuff. It was very, like a little yard Jeep that. You know what I'm talking about, right? It was
Yeah.
very,
Before
very impressive.
I have been in this building
it
when
was fun.
like the bell goes and classes are moving.
That's
so
when I saw the
can't-
Jeep. I saw the
can't
Jeep
imagine
in between periods,
the logistics.
and it was very brave.
Dedication. That's
Yeah,
brilliant.
but that's it. That's all I have for the update.
Great. Anything, Courtney? Okay. School committee updates? Well, the school DEI team met on Thursday, and we had a really interesting session where we kind of kickstarted Magali, ran a activity that kind of, one of the conversations that's come up in the school DEI and then has kind of filtered in through the town DEI committee is, creating an understanding and a definition of, diversity, equity, inclusion across, a common understanding across not just staff, but, families, community members and stuff. So we kind of kick-started that process with Magali on
Thursday, and then we have also kind of put a bit more structure in place for the year moving forward. And so we've created 3 kind of district-wide working groups that are going to be focusing on professional development, kind of staff resources, policy, and student handbooks through kind of with a DEI lens, reviewing those, and the equity audit. There we go. And then on top of those working groups, we're also in the middle of trying to roll out school-based teams, DEI teams, so that each school will have their own DEI team, some of members of which will filter back into the district-wide DEI team. And so that is what's been happening with the school DEI committee. It went really well. And then following on from that, just a reminder that the town DEI committee meets on Wednesday this week in this room, but also hybrid.
Great. Any other school committee updates?
Start time subcommittee met week before last, I think after our last meeting, right?
Yeah.
And we met with Jennifer Piper, it's not transportation director, help me here.
Coordinator.
Coordinator, thank you, couldn't think of that word. To look at what our bus utilization, our ridership is now, just so we as a committee, subcommittee understand what the numbers are and what's in play if we were to look at tweaking anything going forward to, and how much leeway, and just kind of how she goes about and how the, working with how they go about coming up with schedules and routes and things like that. So I think we walked away with appreciation for how difficult that is, but a much better understanding of what the numbers are, and something we've talked about is looking at bus routing software. And so we're going to, at the very least, even if we don't use it long term, to enable us, if we could even get something in a demo form or something, to run some scenarios and run some numbers on different start times and different routing options. And so that's something we're pursuing right now.
Great. Thank you for that segue, because just as a circle back, we had special town meeting, and the warrant article to authorize the school committee to negotiate a 3-year contract with the option for 2 extension years did pass. If anyone attended and has thoughts on special town meeting, tomorrow's select board meeting will, they're doing like a debrief on sort of the logistics and how the meeting went. So I encourage anyone listening that has feedback to share that with the select board.
And that's here tomorrow night. It's not at town hall.
That's right.
It'll be at Millennium.
Thank you. Yep. Hybrid.
Hybrid.
Yep. And then I was going to add that last Wednesday, the Budget Task Force presented our final report to the joint boards, Finance Committee, School Committee, and Select Board. I encourage everybody to read past the 2-page executive summary, but at least the 2-page executive summary. For anyone listening, it shouldn't, it's something we have been talking about in several meetings. FY25 is seeing an increase in expenses of $7 to $10 million from a combination of factors, and the 100-page report goes through a lot of benchmarking, efficiency ideas, potential impacts, and just a good primer on our town budget and where things stand. So that will probably be like a review, next steps on our next agenda. So in the next 2 weeks, please try to find time, or I'm happy to set up a call and one-on-one.
You read it to us?
Read it to you. Yeah.
I've been waiting for the audible version.
Book, and we can put it
Yeah,
on
I
2
know.
times.
Yeah, you could watch the recording of last Wednesday's meeting on YouTube at 2x if
Oh,
you
that's good.
prefer.
I tried to do that live, it didn't work.
Just feed to just GPT and then you're done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
think some thanks to Chris and Valerie and to Jenny and others working on that task force and all the work that's happening in town.
Yeah.
It's really important, so thank
Thanks,
you.
Bill. And if you start getting through the report, that is a serious offer that I'm happy to have a phone call. I know it's dense, so. Student updates.
Yeah, so like Dr. Chu said, this week was Spirit Week, this last week. And anything but a backpack day, which was definitely the most interesting to be walking around during. But then the day where everyone wore their class shirts, which was a spirit rally, which went much better than last year, with all those issues considered. But it was very smooth, very fun. Nothing that I know of like similar to last year. And then Saturday and Friday night were both homecomings, the underclassmen and upperclassmen homecomings. Those also went smoothly. And this Friday we have trunk or treat at WA, which is again geared towards the elementary school kids and run by WA students.
Yeah, 5 to 7, right?
Yes, 5 to 7 at the WA parking lot.
See you there.
Yeah, alongside everything that Alex mentioned, AP exam registration is happening. The regular registration has already ended, so if you're to register now, there's like I think a $5 upcharge, but the last day to register for AP exams is on the 31st. Coming up as well are college apps. The next big deadline, November 1st, is the big one. I think it's like 9 days away. The November 5th SAT is also coming up, and I think just colleges are still continuing to visit. WA, I think George Washington is due to visit tomorrow. Tufts visited today, and so again, college is still just rolling.
Great.
Can I claw back school committee update?
I'll allow it.
Because I feel remiss in not mentioning that we had
Oh,
our
that's
first
right.
meeting with our student
Oh, yeah.
advisory committee on Friday. Fully constituted 5-member advisory committee with a new senior and a freshman, because we have 2 seniors on the committee, and it was great. It was such a good discussion. So glad to see them all, and had a good discussion about 8th grade trip, DC trip, which was really good to hear that perspective, but looking forward to this year. And we have a tentative schedule of every other Friday. We like to meet before our meetings so that we can bring them an agenda for our Monday meetings and talk about things that are on the agenda. But we'll also look for opportunities, because we'd like as many school committee members as possible to be able to meet with the student advisory committee. We'll look for other opportunities to meet at other times, like maybe do some before our Monday meetings as well. So we'll more on that coming. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Anything else? Students were done. Okay, so first order of business is a follow-up discussion on the grade 8 field trip. I assume everybody had a chance to look at the email from Dr. Chu that was also added to our meeting packet. And then I'll let Dr. Chu lead from there.
Sure.
Thank you.
So yeah, so on Wednesday, I shared with all of you the email that I was sending out to 8th grade families. That was designed to hopefully provide some more clarity and to answer some more questions. One of the things that I think is important, that we do want to acknowledge and apologize for frustration, for disappointment, anger that I think has been generated. We have had responses that echo that, and we've had responses of relief, appreciation, and understanding as well in the decision that was made. The timing of it, certainly, I think, hindsight, I feel like that is certainly a concern. And one of the things that we talked about, and we talked about with the leadership from WEPTO when we met with them, was about, okay, well, why then wasn't there a debrief following previous 8th grade trips, which I think is a great question. And we didn't. That's actually just something that we hadn't done. We hadn't had a regular practice of doing that beforehand, outside of if there was a specific concern that came up, then you might be dealing with that concern, but not as a large conversation about the trip. But one of the things I don't know if people are aware of, I think you're all aware of this, but I don't know if the general public is aware of it, is just that when the trip came before the school committee last spring for your approval as a placeholder, that was actually before the trip even takes place. Just the timing of that is such. Not that that's just informational. That doesn't I think have any other piece other than just letting people kind of understand that, because I think you had people asking you that question as well too. And one of the things that that I tried to communicate, I understand if people feel like there hasn't been full transparency or they don't have all of the answers to everything. I do think this is a scenario where there are a lot of reasons, some of which can be discussed and some of which won't be discussed. But the thing that I really want to focus on is I have consistently heard from people who talk about Westford being a very special place and this trip being a very special part of that. And I do want to challenge that notion because I also believe that Westford is a very special public school system. I don't think that one trip is what makes Westford Public Schools so special. I think it's the fact that our students are regularly enjoying the relationships that they're building with their teachers in school. I think our students are engaged on a regular basis in all of their classes. Our students enjoy going to school. These are the things that make Westford special, not just one specific trip. And I know that was a thing that was coming up a lot in some of the emails that I was receiving. And so I really wanted to challenge that notion. And I understand the disappointment. I understand why people are frustrated. I do think that we have provided a lot of information. I think one of the things that we want to do potentially as a committee is to, as we were talking about field trips in the spring, look at different factors that are going into that. I know there are people who are concerned that I'm just anti-field trips. It couldn't be further from the truth. I'm not anti-overnight trips. I'm not anti-field trips. And so I just wanted to share that with all of you. I don't know if any of you have any questions or not. Yeah, Alex.
I want to say, I get that you're saying that this one field trip isn't like the base of the Westford schools, but I think the idea of overnight trips growing up in Westford was something I look forward to all of like my childhood in school. And as I've seen from the Disney trip, that once a trip goes away, it's much more difficult to come back and bring back, especially the overnight trips. So I'm just kind of worried that if we're so easily getting rid of the overnight trips, that they're never going to come back. And that is something that I think is a big part of the Westford school system and a positive part of the Westford school system.
Well, thank you, Alex, and I appreciate that. There are overnight trips that are taking place this year. There are overnight trips that are taking place at the academy, right?
Yeah.
They're continuing to happen. We've brought them back after COVID, and they've continued to happen. The concern that I've shared is the notion of this class trip, this trip for everybody being an overnight trip. I don't think is appropriate. That's not the reason why this was canceled, but that is one of the reasons why I think that that we did decide to not continue with it.
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense. It's just the inclusivity of everyone. If you have a trip that's offered and has the space for everybody, I think that's just much more inclusive than, you said there are overnight trips at Westford Academy. I know there's Italy, last year there was Greece, there's a bunch of
exchanges.
Spanish, French exchange trips,
Yeah.
but those are very small, limited trips that the whole school or the whole grade even is not available to go on. So I think these two big trips are something that in the past the whole grade is invited to go to. That really they really included everybody.
Thanks. Comments from the,
Yeah, so during COVID, when my daughter's like 8th grade trip got canceled, she was devastated. But like, there isn't anything could be done. But like, she has been looking for that trip since like kindergarten. So to your point, but like looking into like what happened for the last 2 to 3 weeks, I think like, there are a bunch of lessons we need to learn. The first is about the process. Based on all those emails and all those communications, and then Dr. Chu, you also say, hey, you got some like appreciation, but like reading from my like emails is 10-to-1 ratio. Okay, we cannot use that to actually justify our feel good feelings. I'll say that people feel this process like transparency for a reason, and then they feel they're not being part of the process, and they feel they're being alienated. I think they're justified, right? So that's the lesson I think needs to be learned to actually how to involve the community, and then not to actually. I wouldn't say like not to disrespect, but like sometimes it shows. People feel being disrespected. The other thing is like, I know that like, you say like you're not against overnight trips or stuff, but when the people working on that trip don't really believe in the trip, yeah, it also shows up. Because I just got the email this afternoon, a bunch of parents, they are able to actually secure a trip, right? So they're going to actually take kids out of the school next June. And then they did it within how long? Within a week, right? So like, this really actually I think the last meeting I feel like, have we tried hard enough? Because from your bottom part, if you don't believe it, then like everything else becomes secondary. The third thing really, I want the administration to look into what really equity means. Because I feel there is a very narrow understanding of equity. Equity is about like providing opportunities. Every kid is different. And then providing opportunity for every kid to thrive, right? Every kid will become different. By actually saying, oh, we're going to take opportunities away, that's not equity. We're doing a disservice to the kids. So those are the three things I feel like those are the lessons we really need to learn.
Thanks, Pink Jen. Sorry, I was waiting on.
No, go ahead, Sean, it's gone.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that the context of where we are allows us to, I mean, obviously we can look back at what was done and say, okay, well, you know, this should have been done, this should have been done. And I agree with some of it, right? Like, in Dr. True, you admitted to some things that if you could have went back in time, that maybe would have been differently. And I appreciated the letter, and I particularly the frequently asked questions. I thought that was really helpful for parents. But what I would be interested in is for us to have a discussion, and maybe that doesn't happen tonight, but like, where do we go from here, right? We've acknowledged that overnight trips, there are some issues with it. Rising travel expenses has been cited multiple times. Uncertain travel times, things of that nature. I mean, these problems, it strikes me that these problems aren't going to get any better anytime soon, particularly with the airline industry. So what I would be interested in is, like, what can we do as a committee, and how can we involve the community in that kind of dialogue going forward? Maybe that's not a discussion as to doing another DC trip in the future or something, but it's like, okay, well, what else are we doing? And are the current plans, replacement plans that we have, are they adequate? Because it seems like there's a lot of frustration with those too. And I acknowledge that this year it's what's said is said and what's done is done. But going forward, what can we do? And involving the PTOs and concerned parents, I think would be helpful to have a dialogue like that. Not to create what it looks like. I'd be curious what people's thoughts are, if it's like an ad hoc committee or if it's just you know, an arm of the superintendent's office for a little bit that will generate some sort of work product to give to the superintendent's office. But I think that would be helpful, because I really don't, I think the concerns that were raised by the administration with this particular trip, some of which are legitimate and just aren't going to go away. So what can we do to strike a balance with the concerned parents that we have and march forward and provide something that's really awesome, that everyone can be excited about, you know. So
Thanks,
those are
Sean.
my thoughts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just continued discussion. Good.
Yeah, I think that there's been a lot of great things have been raised today, and I really have appreciated the students and the parents being part of this process. I think folks coming to speak to us has been really, really powerful, and I think it's really, really important. And there's so many things that we talk about that oftentimes folks don't get the chance to hear about. So I really feel like when folks do come to talk to us, that feedback should even be more weighted, because most of the time folks are really involved in things that they're doing with their kids, and so they don't have the opportunity, their time to come to see us. And I think that, I don't know, I'm concerned, I think, about some of the feedback that I've heard from parents about the distrust that they now feel for us in the process, and I feel like that can have ripple effects into folks being less engaged when we need them, because I have heard some of that feedback as well. And I think that some of what we're seeing is folks putting energy towards creating a process outside of school, which will then prevent people from participating in things in school, because what they're doing is they're creating an opportunity that they feel like is more appropriate one for their kids. And so we'll see some loss of resources, and I think that will be a loss at school, because there's a lot of people who give a lot of time and resources to our schools to help things go smoothly. And I feel like some of what I'm hearing from folks is that they may be less likely to engage or put resources in that direction. And I think that there is some mending that we need to do there. But I think that if one of the questions I have, and I'll toss this to you, and you can answer this now or not, is if folks do decide to go on this educational trip to see if they do create this parallel track, are those absences going to be excused? This is one of the questions I have, because I think folks might be putting together this trip, and so I think, there's a case to be made that it's, educational, and that, comparing that with other things that they might be doing, I think there might be an opportunity to think about that.
I think it's a great question, and I can't answer it right now, though, because I'd need to look at that more, right? Because I need to look and see. It's not out of the realm of possibility, but I would need to know what is the conflict that we're talking about, what are the days that we're talking about, what in order for something to do that. It is there have been times technically we have present and absent. That's all we have. And that's all the state cares about as far as our numbers are concerned. Now, whether or not we say someone won't get in trouble because they're not in school that day because of the internal rules that we have, whether they can make up stuff, whether they can't make up stuff at different grade levels, those are the different things. What we can't do is we can't say to the state that they were in school when they weren't. But as far as any consequences, right, or things like that, I think that's a whole different conversation. But I would just need to look at that more specifically before I could give an exact answer. But you're the first person who's asked me that question. So no one has asked me that question yet. So if somebody asks me,
I spend a lot of time in the school world.
Right. But I'll look at it, and if somebody shares with me a specific question about specific dates, then I'll look at it.
Yeah.
So I don't want to spend too much time on what's happened, but I do agree that I think we all can learn, from any circumstance and something like this, how do we communicate and when do we have to? Because I also want to acknowledge that it's not smart, efficient, or appropriate for the public to be informed of and weigh in on every decision in our school system. We hire people to do jobs so that we don't have to go pull every person in the community on every decision. So there is a line, I believe, that you make decisions, and your principals make decisions, and teachers make decisions every day. I do think this is one of those and I would also say this particular decision, if I were facing the same information you had, all of the information, and I know it's been hard to get sort of inform people of all the factors, because I do think it's complex. I have no, I very likely would feel the same way, that this is not sustainable going forward. You know, that's the sense I've gotten. All that said, to Sean's point, to Ming-Chen's point, I think when it's something this big, we've learned it from 5th grade camp, we've learned it from other things, that it really, even if it doesn't impact the decision, even if you're not sure we can do another decision, or it really helps to bring people along and let them know what we're thinking and to hear their thoughts. And it's informative for us as a committee, I think, too, to always to get that chance to hear, oh, like we didn't know how that was impacting certain people. So that's in the past. I also, Sean, and I don't know who else said it, I think looking forward, or Dr. Chu said it, looking forward, thinking about what we do about 8th grade field trips and field trips in general going forward would be really great. I think it's something the committee could be involved with, the PTOs potentially, but not for this year, but longer term, reimagining, you know, what makes sense, things that meet our curricular needs, things that meet our equity needs, things that meet our social emotional needs for our students. So I think that would be a nice opportunity, just as Sean said, to look into that. And then lastly, I think that brings us, so we've looked back, we've looked forward to right now. You know, it's clear to me that the DC trip isn't happening for this year. It's clear to me that we have other plans, but I would also encourage us, if there's opportunity and flexibility, to enhance the existing plans. Maybe there's nothing that makes sense, but I've heard ideas generated. I would certainly encourage us to think about, like, if there's tweaks that can be made to those days in the spring for our 8th graders for this year.
Chris, to kind of piggyback off what you said, I think the definition of a field trip, right, is simply put, I think, an extension of learning, right? If we're talking about an 8th grade trip with respect to the civics curriculum, the DC trip, all of its trips and locations and the experiences, is there, and 2 weeks ago, right, I posited what are the alternatives, right? What are the contingencies? Is going to Boston and the Freedom Trail or duck boats, whatever the option is that worthy enough of an extension of learning for the 8th grade's curriculum, civics curriculum? If it's a celebratory or culminating experience for the 8th grade class, is Canopy Lake Park, or are there other alternatives, like Chris mentioned, viable alternatives for that group that has spent a good chunk of time in 2 schools together, learning and working together, and should be a culminating experience. So I think, you know, the challenge, I think, for all of us and for the administration is, you know, what can we do to, I think, continue discussion. But people aren't satisfied, and we understand that, but I think the end game in the future is to try to work towards something that's more accomplishes the task of a DC trip or a Disney trip or a 5th grade camp. Those things don't happen. What is something that can replace it as much as it was before? So that's how I feel as an educator and as somebody who sits in your shoes each day and deals with those challenges and those battles, and communication is paramount. So those are my thoughts.
I just want to stop there for one quick second, which is I want to take some responsibility for last meeting where there was a little bit too much ambiguity, I thought, and I want to try to rectify that in this meeting, which was, but I've heard some things about this current year's alternative plans. I just wanted to know if you want to add anything about what you know about what's locked in or what's not.
So the trips as described by the 2 principals are still planning to take place. The 2 principals are also working with their 8th grades, talking to their students, soliciting different ideas to either increase those opportunities, to add additional things as well to that. I know there's a slightly different conversation taking place at Stony Brook than at Blanchard, because the Blanchard 8th grade students were already planning to go to the Canopy Lake. That's already a part of their end of year piece. The challenge at Stony Brook is that the 7th graders do that, so that the 8th graders felt like they just did that last year. So I know Ms. Hammer is talking to the 8th grade students about that. I don't know if that's going to change. I'm not sure. But I know that they're talking to the students to get their feedback about the end of year festivities and culminating events so that they have a voice in things that they're doing. They are moving forward with the 2 days in Boston and, like I said, potentially the Canopy Lake, unless that shifts at Stony Brook, but that is where we're at.
Thank you.
I just want to respond to something that Chris said, because I think there's an important distinction to be made. I think that no one on this committee is trying to tell the superintendent or the principals how to do their jobs. And I think that there's been a number of conversations in this room throughout the year that I've been here where there's been conversations about what is left to the superintendent and what is left to the school committee. I think that when there was conversations 2 weeks ago about getting feedback from the families, it was when there was representations that we knew why certain students had or had not participated. And I think that that's where we get into dangerous territory, especially around equity and inclusion, when we assume that we know the perspective of others when they have not had an opportunity to voice that. So I think when I'm talking about, or when I raise in this meeting around making sure that those voices are heard, it's when others are making representation about that perspective and we haven't necessarily been given a formal opportunity to receive that feedback. So I think that's a really important part of, as Min-Chen was talking earlier about like what equity really means, and I think that's a really important distinction of whether or not folks are brought to the table when we are assuming what their perspective might be.
Yeah.
If there's nobody. You mentioned talking to the students. I really appreciated that, because I do think getting the perspective of students, because I think we're hearing a lot from parents
Right.
Yeah.
and not enough from students on this. And so I appreciate that. I think that's a smart thing to do. That makes me think about the conversation we had on Friday. I didn't know if, Maisha, if you wanted to talk and try to capture some of the sentiments that were
You might
expressed.
want to lean towards Alex.
Yeah,
if
I was
not.
about to say, move the mic.
Not to put you on the spot.
Not to put you on the spot. If you don't want to, I'm happy to.
Again, so out of everyone on the student advisory committee, out of the 5 of us, obviously I didn't go on the 8th grade field trip because of COVID, and then neither did, I think, our junior and sophomore member. I think still COVID, and then our freshman member, he just was on vacation, and so ironically none of us have been on the trip, and at least the consensus amongst us, we all had actually different opinions, like for both the senior members, at least myself, if COVID hadn't happened, I probably would have gone on the 8th grade trip myself. And then our other senior member said that she probably wouldn't have, and she's not here, so I don't want to tell her reasonings behind it, but I think the thing that we were talking about was kind of something that you guys have echoed, is looking at like future years, because I think in my head, at least, it seems like it's not going to happen this year, and there's little that we can do about what has already happened. And so then, at least also what Alex mentioned with like concern of like for future years, or that it's like a permanent thing, or the idea that yes, there's overnight trips, but those overnight trips are limited to like all the French kids go on the French exchange, all the Spanish kids go who take Spanish go on the Spanish exchange. Like the opportunity for a class-wide overnight trip, I think it's still a great opportunity to have for students, even if we would have to alter it and deviate away from DC. I think we could explore other options. I think that's what we were talking about, explore other options for that option to be still available to students, even if it does look different.
Thanks. I'll just so a couple things I'm hearing, but one thing I think sort of in our control is a later conversation. Maybe, typically we get field trip requests in the spring. I think it was like early May, right, for the last one. So maybe around then we could think about or as we get closer to it, especially if there's some sort of community forum or dialogue that you guys have mentioned. Because I think Dr. Chu mentioned it briefly too, but one thing that I've been reflecting on as we have had these conversations and read the emails is that I feel like especially since COVID, but in the spring when we get the requests, we sort of have that understanding that this is like an early request, it's a placeholder, right? And what I don't think I appreciated enough was that someone else might be looking at that as a guarantee.
Yep.
And so, one thing I looked at with, briefly was, we actually have a policy, P5404, that talks about field trips and like what our approvals should be for just overnight and just foreign. But other things have come to us, right, from just past practice, and whether we're like, we just don't want to be, whether we're like letting that, are we creating a barrier by our approval process or not, and being more upfront about what our early approval really stands for, and that it's not always a guarantee that that it's an ask a year in advance, and that, but adding like that debrief process in, I think, and then having that discussion about what do we think the district could move towards.
Would you like the policy subcommittee to review the policy at some point? Sorry, Chris.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
That might be the good beginning of it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
To look at that and see if that is the genesis of the conversation too.
And I think just one other point is the idea that, like, that one middle school, the 7th grade was going to Canopy, and one middle school, the 8th grade. And I think that as part of that sort of 8th grade reimagining or whatever conversation we could have, I wonder if there's a way to get things sort of more aligned so that in the future, because I feel locked in by that.
Right.
Like that's creating an issue for this year. Whereas if our grades, like 7th grade in both schools were doing the same thing, and both 8th grades were doing the same thing, then that creates a little bit more of that synergy to allow for that flexibility, as opposed to this year where we are sort of
Right,
reacting.
right.
Yeah. And I think we've heard that all along, right? Sort of, oh, one school does this, one school does this, so maybe this is a chance to kind of clean the slate and think about some synergy between the two schools. Any final thoughts?
I think just the main important thing is really to get the voices of our staff, our teachers, involved in the conversation, and students is key. I mean, like Bill said, our policies you mentioned typically says, it's of educational value. And so I think really, they're curriculum coordinators, they're the ones who are in depth with knowing it. So I think making sure that their voices are elevated throughout the process would be important.
Okay. Good conversation. Thank you, everyone. Next, we'll welcome up Jeff Goodwin, Director of Facilities, for the next business item, facilities update and FY25 capital requests.
Presentation.
I'm going to pull it up. Give me 1 second. My computer is.
While we're waiting, can I just thank Jeff for excellent job at town meeting the special town meeting last week? Amidst a lively meeting, you had to respond to a number of questions from the public, and I thought you did a really good job. So I personally appreciated your knowledge and your manner about going about that.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I earlier mentioned the school bus contract authorization, but also Blanchard rooftop HVAC units were approved.
Right.
Whew, words are tough today, so.
To get that.
Can you see over me?
I can.
Okay, great. It's challenging.
Well, thank you for having me. Here to provide.
Under view, maybe?
If you go to view, yeah.
My chair is so noisy.
Yeah, I usually like that one. I switched, came in early.
Where are you
switched.
seeing that? Oh, there.
Slideshow.
There it is.
From the beginning.
Slideshow from beginning.
All
All the way to the
There
left, there you go.
Should I do these in Google Slides from now on?
Maybe.
Okay. All right.
No, it's going great. It's going great.
Yeah.
We're up and running.
All right, well,
Take it away. Thank you.
Thank you for having me tonight. Here to provide, it's capital season, so here to provide an overview of, where we started last year in this process with SMMA and where we are today and what that means for capital planning moving forward. We have a 750-page robust document from SMMA, and there's a lot of information in there, and now we have now the real work begins, and we have to cull that information into what is going to be our master plan over the next 10 years. So it's exciting, it's daunting, but it's a process that I'm eager to get into, and hopefully by the end of tonight, maybe we'll have a couple of volunteers that are eager to get into it with us. So just teeing that up early.
Right.
Before, at the beginning here, I just want to give a quick brief timeline and overview of the process dating back to last fall around this time. End of November, early December, SMMA started touring all of our buildings. I spent most of the month of December going through the buildings with them. Engineers from all these different disciplines, site, structural, architectural, plumbing, fire protection, HVAC, and electrical, all toured the buildings. And as a new facilities director, this was an overwhelming task to go through the buildings. I know Valerie joined me for the Westford Academy Day, and I know both of our heads were spinning as we walked around the building that day. These tours happened, and what we got out of that, which was presented to us in January of 2023, was the draft list of recommended capital items. Around this same time frame, SMMA was also meeting with school administrators, Dr. Chu, principals, and teachers in the buildings, discussing what the educational adequacy of the buildings were and some of the needs and wants that they had. So January 23, we received our draft assessments. We spent a month or two working with SMMA, sort of culling that out and refining the lists as we got towards the spring. In March, we had our Mentimeter session at Stony Brook School, where we engaged the public on our public discussion about whether or not people would be open to grade reconfigurations and alternate start times and stuff of that nature. And that was all leading up to April 14th, when we actually submitted our SOI to the MSBA. And flash forward to today, August 31st, we actually had the MSBA at Robinson School, and we are now waiting for a response from the MSBA. So it's been an exciting process, and I think that I know I am waiting anxiously for a response from MSBA to see what they're telling us about the Robinson School. So we have this list now. It's $146 million worth of capital on that list. And I think that it's important when we look at that list that we look at it with a certain amount of context and understand that, it's a big number, but some of those items are already actually in process. Some of them, they might not be executed the way they're written up on the list. For instance, some of the recommendations, replace all the piping in the Abbott Elementary School. It's probably not how that's going to work. We're not just going to say, okay, let's replace the piping. We'll, as there's a need, we will address the need. So I think it's important before we, get into further discussion. I just wanted to talk a little bit about my methodology when I'm planning capital, which before I even get into it, I'll say that it works very well if I was operating in a vacuum. This is how I would like to do it. But I think that what we're doing at the Blanchard School this year is a great opportunity to look at how we'd like to plan capital moving forward. And that's kind of a top-down and down-out approach. A lot of people ask me, when are you doing the parking lot at Blanchard? And my response is next summer I'm going to have cranes in there, heavy equipment moving stuff around. We don't want to do a new parking lot when we have all this infrastructure on the roof going on. So I'm kind of looking at it as, okay, we're starting with the roof, working on HVAC on the roof. We're going to work our way down into the building, looking at building management systems, lighting, insulation, and projects like that, and then work our way out towards the parking lot. With that being said, I understand that there's always going to be outside influences or other things that impact how we plan and schedule these maintenance needs, but I think ideally that's the approach we want to look at. And I know that I'm already kind of seeing and looking at what's down the road for Westford Academy in the same regard. There's no doubt in my mind that we have a lot of work coming in there in the next few years, so.
There we go.
All right. So with that being said, here's some of our upcoming projects. The big one, of course, is the Blanchard roof coming this summer. And then the HVAC and ventilation, which was just voted on at town meeting for $1 million. These are two very huge and invasive projects into the schools, and I'll just say that I'll have my hands full next summer, that's for sure. On top of that, the plan is the Stony Brook and athletic courts at track. We're in the process of finalizing the design for that right now. I do have preliminary cost estimates, but I didn't want to share them tonight because I do think that I need to refine the scope just a little bit on what we're looking at there. But my intent is to get that out to bid so we have fresh bids going into March town meeting and perhaps mobilize that project this coming summer as well. So if anyone has any ideas or thoughts about the Stony Brook Athletic Complex, now's the time to get your design ideas in.
Speak now.
Yeah, speak now, yeah. Dr. Chu touched upon this one earlier, the Nabnasset Playground Project. This one came as a little bit of a surprise, but we were lucky enough to get some grant funding from Jim Arciero's office, and I'm now in the process of selecting a designer for this project. There's a little bit of a silver lining as it relates to this one. A couple of years ago, Paul Fox did get some design funds to have the driveway widened behind Nabnasset School. And I've been working with engineering for the past year on that project, and we've run into a couple of snags as it relates to having the playgrounds currently opposite the driveway of where we're routing traffic. This new playground project, I'm seeing an opportunity to actually alleviate those concerns that engineering's identified and perhaps pave the way for us to repave the park. Yeah, there we go, pun intended. So those are two projects that are kind of in unison with each other at this point.
Can I ask Jeff, just on the NAB project, there's 2 playgrounds at that school.
Correct.
Is the idea that we would be changing one or creating one new one, or?
Yeah. So when I was originally informed about this project and what they wanted to do, they were specifically looking at the preschool playground at the far end of the building.
One,
the equipment on that playground really doesn't adequately serve the needs of the age group using the playground. As I was sitting there talking with them, it dawned on me that we have 2 playgrounds that really have safety concerns and issues that need to be resolved. And potentially relocating both playgrounds to one consolidated playground, similar to what we just did at Robinson, I think presents the opportunity where we can sort of alleviate some of that friction, as engineering likes to call it, behind the building, and have a much safer play area there. So,
awesome. So
it's now gone from 1 playground to 2 playgrounds, but I think it's a prudent idea to look at it at this point.
Awesome.
A couple other, one of the big things that's going to impact what we put in for capital over the next few years, and I'm not sure if anyone's been paying attention to select board meetings, but the town did recently agree to have Amoresco continue forward with the IGA, which is an investment grade audit of all energy conservation measures in town buildings. Once again, another robust report we have with a lot of recommendations. It's exciting. We're going to be getting the report back from them in January, and at that point the town may or may not decide that they want to bring that to town meeting for a vote. But there is a lot of projects recommended within this report that they're pulled right out of the feasibility study. So there's a lot of ECMs in there that are also in the feasibility study. And if we do move forward with the Amoresco IGA, it's a great way to bundle a whole bunch of projects together under one allotment of money.
Can you just remind everybody what ECMs is?
Energy conservation measures. So obviously with the budget crunch coming up that we're facing, I think it's a great time to be looking at projects like this. There's some with a very simple payback and a very quick return on investment. Some are a little longer. The second one on that list, we see we have lighting and then energy management systems. The energy management systems is one that's really an important piece for us. Right now, we're operating our schools with a legacy Siemens software system that was sunsetted back in 2021. There is no longer customer support for this product.
Oh.
So every time we have a power outage that jolts a building, it really causes us to be reeling in a lot of ways. Similar to what happened to us at Westford Academy over the summer. We took a power jolt in July, and it took me almost a month to sort those issues out because it really zapped our control system. So those are all projects that can be lumped in with the Amoresco IGA, as well as pneumatic controls at Blanchard, and building envelope improvements district-wide. So.
Can I just interject for a quick second with a budget task force lens? Is that some of when we benchmarked ourselves against other districts, some of our some in the subcategories where we are slightly higher than average for some expenses, some of them are due to just our infrastructure and having 9 buildings. And so anything I think we can do in that area is really powerful, and heating actually was one of them specifically. So this is all great.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know, to the last point there, we have 2 projects coming up in the next few months. We're going to be doing some insulation work at both Westford Academy and the Miller School. Also projects that were identified in the feasibility study. We're going to be doing these with the Green Communities grant funding. So the Westford Academy, the net cost to the town, you know, before we get the grant money, at the end, none of this is going to cost the town anything, but the net cost is $38,710, and then we're doing work at the Miller School, $58,820. They're estimating that this is going to save us around $13,000 a year in energy costs in the schools. So, you know, there's a little time on the payback, but it's time, money well spent. So,
Can I just ask a question? Can you share with everybody maybe why Miller would be so much more expensive than the Academy when Miller's a smaller building and a newer building?
So when they looked around at the building and the insulation and the envelope issues, there were more issues actually discovered with Miller than they were at the Academy. So, and then also sometimes depending on the size of the building, and there's a lot of factors that go into to justifying how much of a rebate you're going to get. The total cost of both of those projects are actually very close to each other, but the rebate at the Academy is much greater. So.
Oh, okay.
So I wanted to, I didn't want to bore everybody by going through the entire list this evening, but I did want to pull out some of the, I'd go through and talk about each building, and I did pull out some projects related to each building just to sort of touch upon that. You know, obviously one of the other big things that we're waiting on is the response from the MSBA. That is really, that's gonna really tell us where we're moving and how we're prioritizing our capital moving forward. So I don't want to say we're stuck in a holding pattern, but yes, that response is going to really dictate where we go and what we do and how we appropriate funds. But this list that I've pulled out here would be the list that I'm really hoping to try and tackle in the next 5 years, and just quickly touch upon some of these issues. And if anybody has any questions, feel free to ask. But and then also some of these projects are also included in that IGA as well. So at the Abbott Elementary School, remove and replace the utility transformer. This one is it's been in the capital database for a few years now. Right now, our transformers at the Abbott School live in a room in the basement, and they're actually 60-something years old. They contain something called PCB oil that we'd prefer to get them out of the basement. Right now, we own the transformers, but nowadays you prefer to have National Grid own the transformers. So that project would involve removing the old transformers and then building a new set of transformers outside of the building that's actually owned and maintained by the grid. Over at Blanchard Middle School here, this one, fully replace automatic temperature controls with DDC building management system. This is work that's also included in the Amoresco IGA package. This is the logical next step. After we replace all the rooftop HVAC units, this is now we want to work our way into the building and update and replace those controls. So over at Crisafulli, and we actually have a few schools that have this same issue that we really do need to work on, is testing the existing glycol in the hot water in the heating system. Glycol is antifreeze, and that keeps us protected if the building were to lose power in the wintertime and we weren't flowing water. Glycol protects the building from freeze-ups and pipe bursts. Right now, we've done some preliminary testing, and we know that we have an inadequate glycol in a few of our buildings. And if you don't have the glycol balanced properly, it actually can be detrimental to the equipment and piping inside the building. So that would be a capital expense that's going to protect our equipment and harden our defenses in the wintertime for sure. Second one at Crisafulli, same thing, replace automatic temperature controls with the DDC building management system, also included in the Amoresco piece. The two at Norman Day School, this is one that's an interesting one that I wanted to put in there. It's a big ticket item. Remove and replace all existing HVAC systems, install new boilers, pumps, piping, and accessories. The replacement of 2 boilers at Day School has been in the capital database for a while now. I think that anytime we're talking about replacing the whole entire heating plant of a building, we need to start asking ourselves, do we want to consider electrification or sustainable, building measures, electric heat pumps? And then that leads to the next question, which is another item that's been included in the feasibility study, is do we want to consider air conditioning our entire buildings? I think that's one that Dr. Chu and I have talked about a little bit. It adds a significant expense to any project, but as we saw in early September when everyone lost their minds during that 95-degree week, that it's a question that is worth asking now. So. At Nabnasset Elementary School, this is the driveway project that I just referenced, milled down areas of the parking lot. Once again, until we get that playground project moving, there's probably not going to be a lot of movement on that one, but that is a priority over there. The Millennium's next on the list. I feel like I needed to include it. We'll have to figure out if we have an appetite to invest heavily in the Millennium building, or if it is going to stay or go away. If it does stay, it isn't going to be in need of a roof and new siding. Over at Miller School, same thing, DDC controls, building management system, test the glycol in the water and replace. Robinson School, everything's up in the air with Robinson, waiting on that response from MSBA. But if we do end up keeping the building, it needs a new roof, needs skylights, exhaust, HVAC, new heating system, the whole 9 yards. Stony Brook, more of the same, glycol, building management controls. And then the big one is Westford Academy. So I included all those projects at Westford Academy. It's pretty well documented, the issues we had this past summer. Right now we have antiquated HVAC equipment on the rooftop specifically. All of the rooftop units there are beyond their serviceable life. We have a building management system that is no longer supported, and we have a significant amount of work that needs to be done up there. Right now, we've included everything that you see here on the list. We've included as a phase 2 approach with Amoresco. So we've already started taking a look at what this project might look like if we choose to do it through performance contracting with them. And interestingly enough, the numbers, if you tallied those up, those are very close to what Amoresco presented us with numbers that they projected for the project. So it's kind of nice to see that those two numbers are aligning so well. But this is this is really, in the next 3 years, I'd really like to see this project mobilized. And it's going to be an expensive one, and it pairs together with the replacement of the roof over there, very similar to what we're doing at Blanchard now. So here we are.
That's the good news.
I hope I didn't move too fast there. I just wanted to quickly kind of blip through the lists, but as I mentioned earlier, now the real work begins. We have a lot of information, and now we have to cull that information into a plan. And
so we had been I talked about this earlier about creating a working group. Jeff and I have right now we have a standing 11 o'clock meeting on Thursdays. And so our thought was that if there were one or two members of the committee who would be able to join us on that meeting or every other meeting, we can, because he just gave us a slice of the list, right? Yeah. Showing something from each school, but like he said, there's $146 million worth of projects that we need to consider as we work together to then develop our 10-year plan. And so we're also, with that time, we're also then going to be bringing the principals to kind of come and meet with us, not all of them together, but each building specifically. So that's sort of the goal. If Thursday at 11 didn't work with anybody in the committee, we can certainly adjust that time. That's just where we landed on our calendars to get started.
Okay. Well, just an open to committee members to reach out to me directly if they have interest, and we can circle back and figure out who that would be.
Perfect.
Could you just, I can't tell from this list what you're moving forward with town capital requests for this cycle.
Okay.
Can you circle back to that?
So the big one is the one we just voted on, was the HVAC for the Blanchard roof. So that's our big capital item of the year. The Stony Brook athletic courts and track I plan to bring to town meeting in the spring.
Okay.
And I'm working aggressively to get the Nabnasset playground project on that spring warrant as well.
And that's all we think from schools.
For facilities. We're also then planning to try to move forward with 2 EVs.
Right.
Which is part of the capital process. So when we do our presentation in November, those are the things we're going to be sharing.
Okay.
The big question is WA, right? And so that's the idea, we know that that's on the radar, but if it can be taken care of effectively through the Amoresco process, that would be a much better way for us to work on that. But that's something that we're also talking about, making sure that it's on the radar and being discussed.
It remains to be seen whether or not we actually, once we have the fully prepared IGA, we'll have to decide as a town whether or not we want to pursue performance contracting through Amoresco or not. I've been working a parallel track on other projects as well, and my intent is to do the same with WA, is to look at other options as far as processes, design, bid, build processes for that. Sue Thomas has been a great resource to me. Her and I have been engaging National Grid quite a bit, working with Grid Expeditors to get costs on projects, so we can do an apples to apples comparison about what their cost model looks like next to Amoresco's. So not just waiting to hear on Amoresco, working the issue from the other end too. That way we have a contingency if that doesn't end up working out for the town. So.
Okay.
And it'll be January before
We'll
get that information.
Correct. We're going to get the IGA back in January, and then that gives us a couple of months to try and figure out if we want to get that on the town meeting warrant for March. So.
I have one more quick question. When you said Blanchard roof, there's no further funding asks though, right? Okay, good.
No. So
could you just
solar panels?
Well,
solar ready.
Solar panels would probably be done through a PPA. So yeah, that would be.
And then could you just remind us briefly what the benefits of using the IGA process, the performance, as opposed to the low bidder state process?
Right. So. With performance contracting, and even with the National Grid Expeditors, you're using a bid process known as 25A. Typically, for construction projects, you have to use Chapter 149, where you have to hire an OPM, engineers, then it costs significant town resources to get the project out to bid.
Yep.
With 25A, you're engaging Amoresco, who has the OPMs on board, engineering on board, And it's a much more streamlined process. There is an overhead and a premium to use that 25A services, but it is a streamlined process, a bidding process.
Right.
that-
And I think, I don't want to speak for capital planning committee, but something that has come up in those conversations is what kind of issues come out when we pick low bids.
Right.
Right? So, you know, maybe in the past that hasn't always led to the best outcome
Right.
or future work needed because we're choosing
Yep.
that lowest bid, so, yeah, thank
and,
you for
and,
that.
and that's, Amoresco was vetted through an RFQ process, so several people were involved with selecting that company.
Yep.
And the same, anyone who overheard the conversation about the police station at town meeting, the company that we're working with, there's multiple companies that we can choose to use, and we vetted them out, so,
Great.
yep.
Yeah, sorry.
Jeff, you made reference to the MSBA and how that's kind of, well, we're waiting in almost in like purgatory, right? Like as to what's going to happen next, right? Remind me again, when should we know, or is there like a date certain for that?
There is. So
Okay.
we should know in November into December. If
Okay.
we are invited into the pipeline, if you will, then that takes place at their board meeting in December. So they let us know ahead of time whether they're going to be considering us for their vote. They invite us to that meeting. At the same time, we could be hearing the bad news around that same time too, if it's not gonna happen. And if that's the case, then we can submit another SOI in April, again, for the same process. So it could then just delay everything. But November, we'll know in December.
Okay.
We will know in December.
And I think this is true, but there would also be, if we are invited in, there would also be some, like a working groups or a subcommittee created through that process too, right? So
Yes, if we're invited in, it
decide-
becomes a very, a very
Regulated.
regulated,
Right.
complex process where we would actually have to go through a full feasibility study for that one project,
Yeah.
right? Which will be important for us to explain to people, because people hear the word feasibility and think we just did that, but what we did was a much higher level feasibility study for the whole master plan. This one would be incredibly targeted just on that building, and it goes through their process, because now they're vetting everything. They will assign OPMs, and we'll go through the schematic phase. They walk us through that process, but it's very regulated, is a good word to
Right,
say. Yeah.
right. I guess just thinking about the ask to the committee about whether that makes sense to have some overlap in those volunteers or not, and.
I would think it
interest.
would be,
Right,
yes,
yeah.
that's a good point, yeah.
Sorry, I was ignoring the side of the room. Were there hands that I didn't see? Anybody? Questions for Jeff? Oh, sure.
I just heard a bunch more subcommittees getting.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Doing the math.
Yeah, yeah. We.
That would require, in addition, like if we go forward with MSBA, we'll have to actually establish like a building
Right.
committee, right? So it would be more than just school committee members as well too. They would be
Yep.
participants in that.
Probably tied in with the permanent town building committee.
Tied in with that, yeah.
Thank you for your detailed presentation.
Can I ask, when we were going through this process last year, there was kind of 3 really buildings flagged,
Mhm.
which was Abbott, Day, and Robinson. And it was kind of suggested to us that by submitting for Robinson, that if we do get accepted to the pipeline and stuff, that it potentially it could open up the conversation in that process about also looking at the Abbott and Day buildings. Is that still
Sort
the case, or?
Sort of, yeah.
Okay.
That's like, yes, the Robinson, Abbott, and Day
Yeah.
were identified as the highest priorities.
Yeah,
Robinson and Abbott being higher than Day even.
yes.
So in our SOI,
Mm-hmm.
we share the information from the different thoughts that we've had about grade reconfiguration, potentially redistricting, things like that. So while we were advised to submit an SOI for one building, even when we were having our visit with them, they asked the question, would we consider consolidation?
Okay.
And it is in our SOI, and I quickly said, absolutely we would. And then I gave them the full feasibility report. They asked for it, so that they could see the 3 different things that SMMA had talked us through. So we had looking at the different possible configurations you could do this, and one of those options has a new, larger building that would, I mean, for all intents and purposes, it would take Robinson and Abbott out of commission, if you will, and then and so that, remembering what that graphic was and all those things.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
they're aware of that.
Okay.
And but what happens is that the MSBA, if you're invited in, you have to come up with 4 things through that process, right? One of which is, if you do nothing, right, what does that look like? If you just bring things up to code, what does that mean, and what would that look like? And then, if you just did a renovation to the space, what would that be? And then what would be a full new build? So they require you to explore those things and then have those as options, and they provide their recommendations throughout that whole process. And ultimately, because they determine, based on a point system and based on what you're looking to do, what they will reimburse. So they have a certain amount of control over that. Now, the town can always make decisions based on other things, but the MSBA is clear about what they will and will not reimburse.
And how long does that kind of would we get to that? How long should it take, or can it take, to get to that point of kind of going?
Couple of years.
Oh.
Wait until you're like
So
kids
before we
graduate.
even have a plan, it's a.
No, I mean, no, a couple of years before it gets to I mean, I would imagine if we were invited into the process,
Yeah.
then I think it would at least take us a full calendar year for them to really do their work diving in to figure out what they think the issues are at Robinson. Maybe next year there might be conversations about but then you have to go into, I mean, there's literally multiple design phases. So it would be multiple years before anything changed.
Okay.
In terms of a new build.
Okay.
That's what when they presented to us, they were
Yeah.
really talking like 26, 27.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to get a sense of, because I know at the same time, we're kind of pausing maybe some decisions in terms of the elementary schools because of that, so.
It's a good question, because that's
Yeah.
like with the school start times, all these
Yeah.
things we need to consider together, right?
Yeah.
Because then there might be things that can't wait
Mhm.
for whatever that project is.
Mhm.
And that could be capacity at one of the buildings, which would really make us look at redistricting sooner.
Yeah.
If we were to do anything other than redistricting, if we were doing any grade reconfigurations, it will require work in the buildings.
Yeah.
So that would have to be targeted and planned, because we literally just even sort of, I don't know how long it would take though, because some of them might be things with restrooms and things like that. But that would be a little bit more involved. But if we needed to even just redistrict so that we could, spread out the capacity, that wouldn't necessarily require us to invest.
But in terms then at least of our feasibility study that we've done, we can at least move forward with looking at Blanchard, Stoney, and WA, because we know
Yeah.
they
And I
don't
think day
kind
school
of-
as well too. I think
Okay.
one of the things that they recognized was that day school honestly just had better bones than we
Okay.
anticipated. So while day school is the third one that pops up
Okay.
on their radar of needs,
Yeah.
it wasn't that it needed to be considered that you would not use it.
Yeah.
It was and then the needs at Abbott and the needs at Robinson were just, are those the investments you really want to make?
Nope, that's perfect. I just like the idea of moving forward,
Yeah,
at least with our,
agreed.
what we
Yep.
can do with our feasibility study,
Yep.
as opposed to just waiting for MSBA to,
Yeah, good point.
awesome.
Thanks, Jeff.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you, Jeff.
Good to see you.
Next up is Jenny Lynn, Director of Finance, School
Is there
Finance.
slides
guys.
I need to
Good night.
show?
Thanks for
Bye,
coming,
guys.
guys.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
And we were on track before Catherine asked questions.
Right, you're still good. 4 minutes is still okay.
It was like
Thank you,
literally
I'm doing my
eight-
due diligence.
It was
Thank you.
8:29 when you asked her.
thought you were pulling a Chris. Now, do you need slides or?
Good evening.
Yes.
Thank you for having me. And so can Catherine help me to pull up the presentation slides?
Yeah.
She's looking for it.
Looking for it. Which one is it, Jenny? This is the drive. Oh,
That's
no,
right
it's
from
in this drive. Okay. Give me 1 second. Yeah. There we go. Down here. This one. There's a touch screen.
Yeah.
It's a touchscreen?
Yeah, just reached over and.
Okay.
Okay, so let's do.
We lost.
We did.
Are we a quorum?
Everybody, you are still a quorum.
We
but
only
everybody
need a
break.
quorum to start.
Intermission. Took a break. No offense, Jenny.
We all need a
Third quarter.
restroom break.
You know, movement break.
And this is, and we're like, this is kind of early.
Thank you for driving. Appreciate that.
Hang on. There we go. There we go.
Okay.
Okay, apologies, Jenny.
So tonight, I will provide you a quarterly financial status update for fiscal year 24's quarter one, general fund and other funds. So this presentation will give you an overview for the budget status, including the spending percentage and the balances by function codes. We will also discuss the updates for federal grants, state grants, revolving accounts, and other relevant informations. And now let's dive into the details to see how our funds are performing. So in the first and the second slide, you can see fiscal year 24's quarter one, general fund balances by function code in comparison to fiscal year 23's quarter one. So on the right corner of this spreadsheet, you will see we have spent and encumbered 94% of our general funds operating budget. Compared to fiscal year 23's quarter one, we spent 92% of general funds operating budget. By the end of September, we have fully encumbered our employee salary. So we've seen a 2% increase in our spending from fiscal year 23 to fiscal year 24. So I will explain to you this 2% increase is mainly attributable to 3 different function codes. So they have been highlighted here in bold. So the first category is function code 3000, other school services. The second function code is 5,000, benefit, insurance, and leases. The last one is function code 9,000, special education tuitions. I will give you a detailed explanation why we see the spending increase in these 3 different categories. Can you move to the next slide for the one after this one? Yes. The first one we will discuss about the function code 3000 other school services. We observe an increase in spending percentage from 45% to 84%. This increase primarily occurred because we see the encumbrance column from fiscal year 23's data and fiscal year 24's data. In fiscal year 24, we encumbered $3.1 million for transportation service because we created a blanket purchase order to encumber the full year of transportation cost. But in fiscal year 23's quarter one, that was not done in the first quarter. That's why you see a huge percentage jump for the encumbrance. In addition to that, for the actual expenditure, because we see the transportation cost for regular bus went up from $414 per bus last year to 445 per bus this year. So that's why you see the actual expenditure column went up from $175,000 to $198,000 in this year. So these combined balance for year-to-date expenditure and encumbrance explain the reason why we see the increase for percentage.
Yeah.
Next slide, we will talk about function code 5,000
Jenny,
benefit.
can I just interrupt for just one second? Thank you.
Sure.
I think that makes total sense. But, and I think everybody here understands, but just in case somebody's listening, can you just also remind them that we're not really spending that much more money? It's
Right.
it's how you encumbered the money.
Yes, it depends on the timing we encumber the 4-year expenditure. So that's why you see like, it seems like we're spending more. But actually for the actual expenditure, we remain pretty consistent throughout the years.
I appreciate this side by side. This is very helpful. Thank you for the layout. It's very nice.
So if you see any other category in the function code 3,000, we don't see big difference for the percentage. For the second function code 5,000, benefit, insurance, and leases, we see the spending increase from 56% to 69%. Basically, that's the same reason for the encumbrance, because we fully encumber the lease cost for recall printer in this whole fiscal year.
Yeah.
Right, so that's why we see the increase. The third category is function code 9,000, special education tuitions. For special education tuition line remains overdrawn for a total deficit $1.4 million compared to $772,000 deficit in the same time frame of last year. This is mainly due to the 14% increase by the Operational Service Division for special education in fiscal year 24. As we all are aware, we didn't budget this increase in fiscal year 24's general fund operating budget. The original plan is to use the one-time fund to cover this spike. And this one-time fund could come from the school choice or special education reserve fund. So we will building this increase in fiscal year 25's general fund's operating budget. Something else I want to point it out, we already charged $2.3 million directly into the circuit breaker grant. We also plan to charge additional $820,000 from Grant 240 to offset the special education tuition. Therefore, the total deficit of $1.4 million we currently see, if we take consideration of Grant 240's $820,000 offset, the estimated special education tuition deficit by the end of fiscal year 24 will be around $600,000. So this deficit will be covered by either of the 3 pockets. So it could be school choice, it could be special education reserve fund, or if we have the remaining balance in our general fund's operating budget, we can use that to offset this deficit.
And so that's a conversation we will have
Right.
later in the year.
Yeah.
Yes. And so overall, we have closely monitored the general fund to ensure effective spending. Despite we seen a 2% increase in our general fund's spending, but we have to take consideration of the encumbrance. Our general fund's actual spending remains consistent. So after we wrap up the general fund, let's shift our attention to federal and state grants. The first one we will discuss about ESSER 3 funding. For ESSER 3 funding, we plan to utilize the remaining balance of $309,000 in fiscal year 24 to support a free 4-day kindergarten. That's part of our 6 years funding strategy So this grant funding is expected to be exhausted by the end of fiscal year 24 for this particular purpose. The next one, Dr. Chu and Jeff already shared with us. We are expecting to receive $100,000 for Nabnasset Playground in November. So Jeff is currently collaborating with the school principal, Nina Buff, to work on this project. The remaining portion of this project will be covered by the town's other funding sources, such as like a CPA fund or other general funds operating budget. Next one is revolving funds. Our revolving funds revenue streams for student activity accounts remains consistent, which provides us a reliable source of funding for extracurricular activities. And after the regular student activity account, we will discuss next slide for our full service revolving account. We see the full service revolving account ending balance went up from fiscal year 23's ending balance around $900,000 to fiscal year 24's quarter one around $1.2 million. So our auditor has requested us to develop a plan to spend down this surplus in the full service account. So we had a discussion with our full service director, Colleen Wallace. So our plan is to use the surplus fund to upgrade and purchase some kitchen equipment. We have already increased the full service staff salary for 3.5% in fiscal year 24 to support the 30% increase in the student participation rate following the adoption of the universal school meal. And we have increased staff hour in fiscal year 24 to accommodate the increased meal participation. And also we plan to hire additional staff to meet the growing demands for the full service department. The last slide is our special revenue funds. Other than the gifts and donation in the special revenue fund, the two important reserves we have in the special revenue funds are school choice and special education reserve. The current ending balance for school choice is around $1.4 million. The ending balance for special education reserve fund is a little bit over $500,000. These fund balance in the reserve could be used to cover our special education tuition overage. If we don't have that capacity in our general funds operating budget, we need to dig into these two reserve funds to help us to support the special education. So overall, we keep ongoing monitoring of our funding status to ensure effective financial management and to maintain financial stabilities. So here is the financial update for first quarter, and thank you so much. I'm happy to answer any question you might have.
Thank you, Jenny.
Thank you, Jenny.
Thank you, Jenny.
It's wonderfully complete, so.
No,
You do a terrific job, John, you really do.
Thank you.
Jenny, knowing the OSD increase was pretty substantial and pretty significant, is there a number that's less than that, but an average that could be assumed going forward that would help to monitor and think ahead with potential increases to any
Yes.
special ed out of district or?
I think we already have that
We actually already
number.
know what potential increases are for FY '25.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's part of the
Do they hope to like table it and level it off for us?
So it's not 14%.
Yeah, no, it's not gonna be
So that's-
14.
And it's not as low as it
It's not
usually
as,
is.
historically, it's we've
Yeah.
assumed, I think, a 3.3%.
3.3, and it's always come in very low.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
2 point something is the
Yeah.
highest, but
What the information that we have had as preparing for FY '25 is we're looking at a 4.6.
I was gonna say 4 to 5 maybe, yeah.
4.69 for fiscal year
4.69.
25.
I think it'll be interesting to see what happens because of the investigation that's happening as well.
Right. Right, and they're still, right.
If it affects like everybody in the state, right, all the towns in the state.
Yes.
So like, like last time there was discussion if the state is going to do anything, but it appears that they're not doing anything right now.
Well, the issue is that in different budgets, the decisions would impact communities differently, right? So, yes, the increase impacted everybody across the board, but the way in which they talked about trying to provide support would help some communities more so than others, and that's where I believe the conversation has. We don't have that information yet. We don't know how that's going to play out. Right.
Historically, in the springtime, we've had extraordinary relief.
Yeah.
So any district that was overly burdened with an unexpected amount of out-of-district tuition, we could apply for extraordinary relief, and in the past, we have been awarded that funding. Where this 14% was sprinkled out evenly, I'm sure that we're going to be, just one of everybody else going for that extraordinary relief,
Right.
if they continue with that model, but we just haven't heard anything yet.
Right. It will also increase the circuit breaker for a certain percentage to
Right.
cover this 14% increase for special education as well.
Okay. Thank you. Any other comments, discussion?
Thank you.
Nope. Thank you, Jenny.
Thank you.
That was the last piece of business, so looking for a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you.
Seconded.
Thank you, Murray. Thank you, Bill. All in favor?